Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Breda Pest Management. Happy to have you with us. Two great guests for us. It's Jake Fromm later on. Always fun to have the former Georgia quarterback on the program, and it's Mike Griffith there as well. And one of the topics we'll get into with both those guests is the lawsuit that Jaden Rashada files against Billy Napier and a Florida booster and a former, NIL collective head. So this is getting a lot of chatter, and it's kind of interesting to see the reaction to all of this. In fact, in Florida circles, they seem to be a little bit more worried about this than maybe originally I thought they might be. So there is some fun to be had at the lousy, stinking Gators' expense on that. And when that's the case, we are the ones for the job. So we promise to do that for you here today. In fact, we'll go ahead and get it started here right now. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So we talked a good bit yesterday about the lawsuit that now Georgia quarterback Jaden Rashada has filed against Billy Napier and a Florida booster and a former NIL collective leader there for the lousy, stinking Gators. And it's one of those deals where, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to law school. Don't probably understand all the facts that are important in a lawsuit situation like this. But luckily, not having all the facts at full grasp has never stopped me from shooting off my mouth. So we're kind of firing off a bunch of opinions on that yesterday. There's sort of a new crop of reactions and some new information on all of this that gives us a chance to sort of re-rack all of this again. And when it comes to making fun of the lousy, stinking Gators, obviously we have a great time doing that around here. One of the things we said at the end of yesterday's show that I'll restate here right now is the one part about this that I feel pretty confident discussing is kind of how this makes me feel about Jaden Rashada, of course, the recent Georgia quarterback transfer from Arizona State. The reason why, he's involved in all this is because allegedly, Florida had offered him this gigantic, 8-figure NIL payment to flip his commitment from Miami to Florida. Then ultimately didn't have the money they promised him. That resulted in Rashada leaving Florida, going to Arizona State. Now he's like, y'all made promises that you didn't keep, and you allegedly perhaps caused me to break an agreement I had with Miami, and that cost me money. And, you guys promised this, you didn't give it to me. You can't do that. And so that's where all this is, and we'll see how this plays out in court. But the one thing I've said is one of the great ongoing debates for all Georgia football fans is who kind of rises to the status of being a DGD, stands for damn good dog, who's a DGD, and, different people have different opinions on who kind of achieves that status. I would say that perhaps, and this is unprecedented maybe, that Jaden Rashada, before he ever even attempts his first pass in a Georgia uniform, as we mentioned yesterday, the fact that he hates Billy Napier this much that he's willing to sue him in court ahead of the upcoming season, then to me, Jaden Rashada has already achieved DGD status. He's already kind of won over the Georgia fan base very early in his Georgia tenure here, just because of his willingness to make kind of life tough on Billy Napier. And so from that standpoint, I think Rashada has gained himself a lot of fans as of late. Now, the other part of this is that, I guess I'm a little surprised by the reaction. To me, this is one of those deals that, and maybe I'm wrong about this because as I said before, I don't know the law and I don't know how civil courts play out. But you always hear about these big, harshly worded, lawsuits that make these very strong allegations. It all seems really scary because if you're an attorney working for your client, when you write this stuff up, you have to write it in the most forceful way possible. But ultimately, a lot of this stuff sort of ends up being settled out of court, and it's all really complicated. Whatever happens ends up being sealed in many cases. That a lot of this kind of stuff starts off big and loud, and it's a lot of saber rattling and things like that. But it sort of fizzles out by the end. And to be honest with you, once again, without really any kind of understanding of the law on this or anything like that, that's sort of what I assume the Jaden Rashada thing would be too. Kind of fun for a day. We sort of laugh at it. But by 2 weeks from now, I probably would have forgotten about it because we're not really the legal beat around here. That's not really what we do. I'm not interested in doing that. And so that's kind of what I thought this was. Sort of fun for a day, but who really cares? It's just going to be one of those things that by the time we get to the actual season, we've sort of forgotten about. However, it is important to note here that the folks down there in Gainesville, or at least around the Florida program, they're not quite as relaxed about this. It seems like there's a little bit more tension around all of this, and some of this for Billy Napier too. Now I want to show you this on the screen here for a moment. A guy named Jesse Simonton, who works for On3. He's a columnist, not necessarily connected to Florida, but sort of reflective of the situation there in Gainesville. It sounds like that some of this is actually kind of landing at Napier's feet, and not in a good way. This headline I love. I love this headline. It says, this is on3.com. After an optimistic spring, Billy Napier faces his latest PR nightmare with the Jaden Rashada lawsuit. Now, a couple of things. Actually, let me read. What Simonton writes here is, it's another optical L for Napier, who has already suffered far too many actual defeats on the field in his first 2 years in Gainesville. The Gators finished under 500 in 2022 and went 5-7 last season. They aren't projected to make a bowl game this fall either, per odds makers. And listen to this. Any goodwill Napier thought he bought himself this spring has gone kaput. So a couple of things here. Apparently I was sleeping, or maybe I was on a cruise, a Royal Caribbean cruise. When did Florida have anything good happen to it this spring? I don't quite remember any of that going on. But what Simonton kind of writes here about, the goodwill of spring has gone kaput. He's not the only one I've sort of seen say that as of late, that apparently people were feeling, for whatever reason, better about Florida after spring. And all of a sudden now, whatever that goodwill was has been given back in what's being described as a PR nightmare for Billy Napier, which sounds pretty good to me. I'm kind of here for that. That seems that seems pretty fun for me. And I guess this is going to kind of come down to, and it's sort of hard to talk about this without kind of getting this into stuff that just sort of gets out of our typical boundaries. But it's like the old line about what did you know and when did you know it? In other words, if we find out in some sort of court proceeding that Napier really did know that whatever money they were supposed to be paying Jaden Rashada, that nobody had that money to pay, that Florida was broke, the NIL collective was broke, they didn't have the money, they were writing checks, literally they couldn't cash, that if he knew that and in some form or fashion helped try to keep that a secret so that Rashada would get to Florida and then they would kind of figure it out after the fact, then he probably has done something not so great, I'm guessing, in the eyes of the law, if it gets to that. Somehow, I'm sort of guessing we don't quite get that moment in court where all of that comes down, but if that be the case, then that would be kind of an issue for Rashada. That there probably are other recruits looking in on this and saying, did you lie? Whatever the actual facts of the situation are, did you lie? Did you exaggerate? Did you do whatever it took to get the player on campus, hoping that you could hold him hostage after the fact when the terms of the deal changed? My guess is other recruits will be looking in on this. And like anything else in life, if you're explaining you're not winning, and the fact that for the next little bit, Napier's going to be forced to explain why he did not commit fraud, whether he did or didn't do it, the fact that he's having to defend himself against the allegation of fraud, well, listen, that in itself is a win if you're Georgia, one of these, rivals of the lousy stinging Gators, because Napier's eye clearly won't be on the ball, at least in some respects, for the upcoming season, which perhaps serves to explain what I think most people view as the most interesting aspect of this as we know it right now. What actually plays out in court, I think even a lot of lawyers are probably, not 100% sure about all of that, because some of the legalese on this, I'm imagining, gets pretty complicated. And the law is, of course, complicated on purpose. But at sort of a face value level, kind of a base level, the one thing that's the easiest for all of us to understand is the fact that the Rashada lawsuit doesn't take place last year while he's living in Tempe, Arizona. It takes place now, shortly after kind of coming to the University of Georgia and shortly after moving into UGA. Is that a coincidence? Who knows? But the one part of a lot of these news reports that people keep noticing and keep kind of pulling out because it's easy for all of us to understand is the fact that all of this seems to be happening right now. In fact, let me show this on CBS Sports. Will Backus was the writer, looking at a timeline of events involving Rashada. He writes that the lawsuit that we now know about took place with the blessing of Georgia coach Kirby Smart. Like, that's the phrase. Those 7 words right there seem to be the thing that everybody's giving the most attention to right now, that all of this happens because of Kirby Smart saying, yeah, go ahead, sue him, see what happens, see if you can get some money out of him. That this goes down with the blessing of Kirby Smart, which in one respect is sort of a throwback to like old school SEC times, as we said yesterday, when Philip Fulmer was not going to SEC media days because he might get served a summons. Some of this sort of feels like an old school aspect of what the SEC's always been, but it also sort of feels like a further escalation of what has in recent years been a white-hot rivalry between Georgia and Florida. And frankly, a lot of that was because Dan Mullen was willing to stir the pot and Kirby Smart was willing to return fire. Billy Napier is such a non-entity, such a blob of, just uninteresting mass that we almost kind of wondered, would the rivalry kind of keep the same level of intensity with this, anonymous no-name, coaching this Florida program? Well, Kirby Smart, by blessing this lawsuit, maybe that's an example of the fact this rivalry still does have some juice, even though, Florida's got a complete unknown as its head coach here right now. So from that standpoint, people seem to be having a good time with it. Honestly, I can't tell you where this is going to go. I don't even know if we'll ever even talk about this on the show again. We did mention it yesterday because it was kind of funny, and mentioning it today because it certainly seems like the folks down in Gainesville are not laughing. They're at least a little bit worried about what this means for their coach, what kind of promises were made, whether or not Napier knew that some improper things were said. I don't know. Let's settle back and kind of settle in and see where this goes. It could be pretty entertaining, at least for a little while. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us, whether it's video or radio, Athens Sports Radio 963. By the way, good to be back with our friends on the radio yesterday after being preempted yesterday for the SEC baseball tournament. By the way, more on that in a moment here coming up. And, of course, all kinds of podcast platforms there as well. Just appreciate you being a part of that. For those of you watching on Facebook, let me say this to you real quick. Hey, the other day I asked you this, and you were very kind to do it. I'm going to ask you again if you don't mind. If you're watching on Facebook, would you mind sharing the show with somebody or just sharing the show with your feed is what I mean to say. Just kind of put that out there to the folks that you're friends with on Facebook. Let them know we're doing the show here each and every day. We're talking Georgia football, and if they want to come in here and laugh at Billy Napier, and they're a Georgia fan, they want to do that, then we'll give them a home and a place to do that. So share the show on Facebook if you're watching that here today. I certainly appreciate all of that. I also appreciate our friends at Breda Pest Management who make the show possible here today, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. Now, some would say that Billy Napier is a pest, and that's why Kirby Smart's swatting him away as easily and effortlessly as he seems to be doing. But if you've got a different kind of pest around your home, I'm talking about the termites, I'm talking about, in Georgia, like flying squirrels, things like that. You got all kinds of stuff in your house. A lot of bugs, a lot of, this is that time of year where it seems like bugs are trying to get into the home. Well, if you got anything like that going on, our friends at Breda Pest Management want to help you out with that. And when you make the switch, especially when it comes to, like, say, your termite protection, you're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. That's what Breda Pest Management is all about. So I want you to find them online. It's BredaPest.com, BREDA, BredaPest.com for more on that. One more time, BREDA, BredaPest.com. Not only do you get the prestige of saying, I work with the same company that UGA works with, and not only do I have the same company that's been in business since 1975 with 125 employees stretched all across the area, and truly, I'm driving around all the time. I'm always seeing those Breda trucks out and about. I love the fact they're taking good care of people, providing great service to people. That's something that means a lot to me. It makes it easier to make the recommendation on air when I know so many personal testimonials of people who've had great work done for them by Breda Pest Management. I remember one night, and this is a true story, we were on our DawgNation cruise, and we're sitting there at dinner, and, it's always one of my favorite parts of our DawgNation cruise on a daily basis is that time at night we all get together for dinner, having a nice conversation on the table, and the subject of Breda Pest Management was coming up. And literally, at the table where we were sitting, 2 different couples had said, yeah, we made the switch to Breda Pest Management, BA, because of what you say there on the show. And they're talking about how happy they were with that. And it's just such a great thing for me to hear that so many of you are so willing to support those that support our show. But I don't just like that because it's good for me, although admittedly it is, But I also believe the companies we tell you about, including our friends at Breda Pest Management, are good for you there as well. So please find them online, BredaPest.com, B-R-E-D-A, BredaPest.com for more on that. All right, we got a couple of great guests for us today. It's Jake Fromm coming up a little bit later on. Always good to have him. We'll get his thoughts, as brief as they might be, on the Rashada situation, because who knows what the legal part of this, but obviously in terms of the quarterback, wanting some promises to be kept. Jake's got plenty to say about that. We'll do that. It's Mike Griffith here coming up in just a little bit, too. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today. And I'm also about 5 minutes away. I teased yesterday we would have a big announcement. About 5 minutes from right now, we're going to give you a pretty big announcement here on the program today. We'll do that here in a little bit. So stick with us, and you can hear that. But before that, a couple of things. Thing number one, when Jeff Sintel, our DawgNation recruiting insider, is on the show tomorrow, we've got a lot to talk about. Big update coming off the scavenger hunt for Georgia this past weekend. Certainly seemed to be a very successful one for Georgia. And one of the things about it that people have certainly really been happy to hear about in the recent days is the fact that Georgia was able to get the five-star offensive lineman David Sanders back on campus again. And Jeff, to his credit, was able to get a very good interview with Sanders talking about what he experienced while he was at Georgia. And this is one of those deals, as we said before, where at one point in time, I sort of thought that Georgia might be receding in the recruitment of Sanders a little bit. Teams like Tennessee or Ohio State perhaps surging, overtaking Georgia, and maybe even Clemson too, who we've talked plenty about. But by getting Sanders back on campus this weekend, you kind of wonder if Georgia has had more momentum behind the scenes here on this than perhaps I had realized and perhaps I'd given it credit for. And to back that point up, let me give you a couple quotes here from Sanders talking about his experience there at UGA this past weekend. The headline at DawgNation.com, priority offensive tackle target, says it doesn't get any better than the University of Georgia. Diving more deeply into this, Sanders writes, obviously they've been a top school in my mind since you've stepped onto Georgia's campus. I mean, you just can't deny the fact that if you're a top player in the country, you want to play against top-level competition. Sanders says you want to play with a guy with the same mindset as you. I mean, it doesn't get any better than the University of Georgia. He goes on to talk about the scavenger hunt in particular, saying not only with Coach Searles and Kirby Smart, but everybody that was with me. So spending time with those guys and spending time with the coaches was just super fun and a cool experience. Now, here's where I think it gets pretty interesting. Sanders says, I gained the fact that you can fit in at Georgia. I feel like it's not just as one-dimensional as people think. I feel like they have a lot to offer outside of football and things like that. So I learned a lot while I was there, but that was the main thing, just adding that personal connection. So when Sanders says it's not as one-dimensional as people think, it's not just about football. I obviously can't presume to know exactly what he means by that, but the assumption I'm going to make here is that I think there's a perception that perhaps exists that, okay, you go to another school if you want to have fun. You come to Georgia if you want to maximize your football potential. And the unwritten kind of subtext to that is that other programs may not be quite as hardcore football, but they're a lot more fun. Georgia is so hardcore football and development, getting in the NFL, and Kirby's so serious as a coach. This is a place that you don't get a chance to have fun. And that's why, as Sanders kind of alludes to, that's why I think things like the scavenger hunt can be so important for UGA, because it does kind of show, listen, these may be very serious football coaches and obviously very successful football coaches, but they also know how to have fun too. And they want to have a personal connection with you as much as the recruit wants to have a personal connection with the coaches. And I think that kind of stuff is really cool and really important. And I think that Georgia does do that well. And it is, I believe, a misperception of Kirby Smart or Stacey Searles or any of Smart's assistants if it's sort of thought to be that they don't value the human part of football as much as they value the on-field component of the sport. And I'm glad to know that David Sanders had that experience. We'll obviously talk to Jeff Sintel more about that when he joins us tomorrow. One of the things we'll also talk to Mike Griffith about here coming up in a moment, to shift gears just briefly, is the fact that for Georgia, a stay in the SEC tournament there in Hoover, Alabama, end up being pretty short-lived. We know that Georgia's been kind of teetering on the opportunity to be a top 8 seed in the upcoming NCAA baseball tournament, which would give the Dogs a chance to possibly host a super regional if Georgia can advance to that point. A loss yesterday to LSU certainly does not help in that regard, but it also doesn't change the overall outlook for Georgia this summer. This is an upcoming postseason, which the Diamond Dogs still have a real opportunity to make some noise. So after losing to LSU yesterday in kind of disappointing fashion, where does Coach Wes Johnson sort of see this team going from here as they await their fate for the upcoming NCAA tournament? This is what Coach Johnson had to say yesterday.
No, I don't worry about stings. I worry about each day you got, no matter who you are or what you do in life, whether it is, wherever. You have to have the mindset of every single day you have two choices. You can wake up and get better, or you can get worse. There's no carpool lane in life. You don't just get to sit and hang out. And so our mindset isn't, regardless of how today goes, we have things we know we've got to get better at. And we've got, like I say, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, whatever it is, to work on that, and we will. And our mindset has to be to get better every single day we take the baseball field.
I really like, I told you this before, I really like the mindset that Wes Johnson's bringing to Georgia right now. This is a guy getting a chance to kind of lead an organization after being a pitching guru for a long time. And I think he kind of shows the relaxed demeanor, like the best Major League Baseball managers have always had. Think about guys that led the Braves to World Series, like Brian Snitker and Bobby Cox. These were kind of player-friendly, relaxed personalities, and I think that serves you well. I don't know that you could have a baseball coach like Kirby Smart. I just don't know that would work. I think that works for Kirby Smart in football, but I want my baseball coach to sort of sound like Wes Johnson sounds like right there. Yeah, we had a bad game. It didn't quite go our way. We got time to sort of figure some stuff out prior to the NCAA tournament, and I trust Wes Johnson having a chance to do that. So let's pay attention to where we kind of go with the NCAA regional announcement for Georgia. Obviously expected to host there for the 4-team regional coming up in Athens. Maybe just given how, teams like Florida State or Oregon State, perhaps Virginia, given how they perform in their own, kind of conference tournaments coming up, will help us determine exactly what Georgia's chances are of being in that top 8. But obviously, DawgNation will be all over that. We'll make that around the doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily. Now, we got Jake Fromm coming up a little bit later on. We've also got Mike Griffith coming up in a couple of minutes there, too. But before we do any of that, let me also kind of pay off what I promised you, which is a very big announcement as DawgNation teams up with our friends at ATL Sports Trips, as you already know, for an incredible series of DawgNation Invasion events coming up this fall. We got a huge tailgate to kick off the season before Georgia takes on Clemson in Atlanta. Got the big trip, DawgNation Invasion to Tuscaloosa in September. But the one that everybody's talking about here right now is DawgNation Invasion to Austin in October, as Georgia, for the very first time as a conference brethren, takes on the Texas Longhorns. It's going to be one of the biggest games that Georgia's ever played. Many of you trying to do everything you can to get there. Well, guess what? Our friends at ATL Sports Trips, in partnership with DawgNation here, we're going to provide you a chance to win your way to Austin, an incredible giveaway here for the DawgNation Invasion event powered by Atlanta Sports Trips. So here's what all of this includes. You can win the ultimate trip to Austin to see the Dogs take on Texas. It includes a 2-night hotel stay. It's passes to the Friday tailgate, or I should say the Friday night football event there with DawgNation, the big tailgate there on Saturday, and, of course, 2 tickets to the game there as well. So all of this is your opportunity to win. You've got a deadline to get in on this of June 5th. So that kind of runs out for you there on June 5th. But the entry period for that opens up today. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to DawgNation.com/tailgate for more information on that. That's DawgNation.com/tailgate. Registration is now open. You've got between now and June 5th to get all of that in. DawgNation.com/tailgate for a lot more on that today. You have your chance to win. Hope you get ready to enjoy all of that. So that is the story on all of that. Obviously, Mike Griffith's supposed to be ready to go for us right now. That is not the case. So why don't we do this? I don't know how possible this is for our folks back there. We've also got Jake Fromm here today, too. Jake typically records with us on Tuesday. Can we just play Jake Fromm right now and try to catch up with Mike Griffith a little bit later on? Is that possible to do? All right, let's just kind of shift things around here a little bit. Talk to Jake Fromm right now. A lot to discuss with him, and then we'll try to catch up with Mike if possible after that's all said and done. So it's a Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here right now. Plenty of fun on the program still to come there as well. But the former Georgia quarterback, how about a great conversation with him as a part of DawgNation Daily here right now? And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for our Kroger Fresh Take is welcoming the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. Jake, it's always great to have you on the program. We appreciate that, and hope you're doing well today.
Yeah, doing great. Always good to be on the program. Thank you.
Obviously, since we've last spoken, some people have found out, not the best news in the Washington Commanders, your time with them coming to an end. And I ask you this for a specific reason because, obviously, as an athlete, you've experienced the highest highs. But if you participate in sports long enough, you also sometimes kind of have the other side of that there as well. And, this is something that a lot of our audience also kind of comes to deal with in their own lives, too. Like, kids want to play on a certain team. Sometimes it doesn't quite work out. And being able to sort of shake that off and sort of move on to the next thing, what's that like for you right now as, you sort of realize, hey, my time there's come to an end. Now I sort of look at the next phase of my football life. What's that like for you personally?
Yeah, I think you kind of said it great. If you play sports long enough, sooner or later, the ball's not gonna go your way. And this just happens to be one of those times. Sucks, man. Really enjoyed that area playing for that team. But it kind of is what it is. The NFL is a business, and thought they had to make a move. So kind of it is what it is. And right now and this time, it's just, hey, we're gonna stay prepared, get the body right, always ready to play, and I'm still in the mindset of wanting to play for as long as I can, and hope to get another opportunity here soon. But it always kind of brings you to the realization of, hey, this game is not played forever, and what are we gonna do next? What's Plan B look like? And just always gets you thinking.
Well, we certainly understand that. We can't wait to hear about good news about your next stop in the NFL, of course. And obviously, you keep your eye on things going on around Georgia football. And, last week, Georgia had a chance to host a kind of a major recruiting event. I don't believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when you were there, they weren't quite doing the scavenger hunt as of yet, the way they kind of do that for recruits now. But while you were, I guess, a recruit, kind of in Kirby Smart's first year prior to you signing, and then while you were a player, you saw some of like the apparatus in place of how Georgia hosts these recruiting events. We kind of hear about some of this kind of stuff sometimes second and third hand of, recruits coming on campus, having a good experience. How does Georgia kind of do this, just sort of broadly speaking, in terms of when they have these big events, bring in the major prospects? Everybody always seems to leave pretty happy, big smile on their face. It takes a lot of people to make something like that work as well as it does. Kind of behind the scenes, how does Georgia kind of make these recruiting events, whether you call it the scavenger hunt or you call it the cookout or whatever else that they've kind of done over the years? How is it that Georgia is able to make these events go so smoothly when so many big-time recruits are coming in and sort of expecting to have a really good experience?
Yeah, because it starts from the top down. Kirby does a great job of recruiting because he's so hand-on with recruiting, and it just kind of trickles down to the right places, and they want to absolutely put on the most top-notch show they possibly can for the recruit, for the families. They want to ensure that everybody has a great time, and there's buy-in from everybody, from the recruiting personnel to the coaches, Coach Smart, and even good friends with one of the caterers all the time, and like they love it. They love going, seeing the players, seeing the coaches, seeing the potential players and the recruits. So there's just a lot of buy-in. People love it. And then also, you can't talk about recruiting and not mention the budget. Georgia spends just by far just way more than everybody else does on recruiting, and it pays its dividends.
Can I tell you what I like about stuff like this? And I know now it's obviously a big business. A lot of these guys will make big NIL dollars, and I don't fault them for doing that. But these recruiting events, we were just showing some video of like Mason Short and David Sanders like jumping in a pond and things like that. There's a certain like wholesomeness to this that's really fun. I remember kind of back in your day, it'd be like the slip and slide, or like, now it's like wanting to win the scavenger hunt, or maybe jumping into a pond. I know that you and some of your, future teammates would sometimes go, like fishing together and things like that. I kind of like the fact that even as like college football is undeniably a huge business, there's still an element of some of these events that sort of feel a little bit wholesome, and it sort of feels like kids having fun, even though there's obviously a kind of a huge business element to all of this. I kind of like the fact that it still sort of feels that way a little bit.
Absolutely. I just be genuine, be real, be who you are, and I think that's what recruits feel a lot on campus. Just from the recruiting personnel, from the coaches, from Coach Smart, they feel the realness, they feel the genuineness, and that's all I ever ask for during recruiting. That's all who I expect everybody else to be in day-to-day life, and I think that's why they're attracted to it, and they want to keep coming back.
Well, speaking of the business side of all of this, we found out this week that the newest dog is now. Listen, it's always been fun to watch Georgia players take on Florida, but this is a little bit of a different idea of that. Jaden Rashada is suing Billy Napier because of an NIL deal that apparently fell through, and he's not just suing Napier; he's suing Booster and NIL stuff there as well. And that's obviously the kind of thing that's a little bit different than what it was like when you were playing. But I was sort of thinking about this from your perspective, Jake, that when you're a quarterback or a player of any stripe, the thing that you really want is, whether it's a coach or whatever, just keep your promise to me. If you tell me you're going to do something, then follow through and do that, because there's still a huge advantage to being the program as opposed to the player in situations like that. And so I don't know if you've got any kind of opinion on the lawsuit in general, but I'm sure you can kind of put yourself in the position of Jaden and saying, man, you told me all this stuff and then you didn't do any of that. I want something for my trouble here. You know, not having promises kept is the kind of thing that players have been having to be forced to deal with from when you were playing to before you were playing, and as far back as any of us can remember, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think I could speak for a lot of people when, like, this is not what we wanted when NIL gets involved. Like, this is not it. We don't want this, all the negative, the lawsuits, the running around, grabbing money from one place and going to another place. Be a man of your word, and mean what you say. So kind of that's what I have on that. I wish I had more details on it to really dive into it, but just from the outside looking in, this is not the product we want from NIL.
Well, we joked about this the other day, which is, for a guy like Jaden Rashada, you want to come in and make a good impression of the fan base right away. Taking Billy Napier to court's a good way to do that. Now, legally, I have no idea if the case has merit or not. But listen, if you're dragging Billy Napier to court, you've already done something that's going to make a lot of Georgia fans happy in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Fighting them on all fronts, and yeah, well, why not give it a shot? And I don't know. We'll see what comes of it.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, this is the time of year a lot of folks getting ready to enjoy some graduations and things like that. And if you've got your own graduation party planned for the graduate in your life, best way to celebrate are with our friends at Kroger, to use proper grammar. The greeting cards, the party platters, the gift cards, all of that to make a great graduation party go the way that's supposed to and celebrate that graduate in your life, whether it's a college grad, a high school grad, a kindergarten grad, whatever the graduation is, fifth grade graduation. Enjoy all of that. Kroger.com/graduation for more on that. Couple of things, Jake, before we let you go here. First of all, a little bit of a irritating story for some Georgia fans this week. Sokovie White, incoming freshman, who I've had a chance to not quite get to know him, but I know people who do know him well. They rave about what a great leader he was in the high school ranks and the expectations to kind of be a very positive part of Georgia's locker room culture moving forward. He had this weird thing the other day where got ticketed going the wrong way, and somehow that led to an arrest where it was a $26 bond. The whole thing was kind of a strange deal there on that. And, I was kind of thinking about, if you're Sokovie, you're fresh out of high school, it must be weird knowing that such a small infraction like this, and obviously people need to be careful. You don't need to drive the wrong way on the road. We would all say that. But such a small infraction like this becomes such a big story. In your career, you had your own kind of version of that, not necessarily traffic tickets, but whether it be like an injury on the 4th of July. I still remember where I was at a cookout when I found out that you'd had the mishap on the boat or whatever, and it's like a relatively small thing in your life, but the whole world is sort of talking about it. That's got to be a weird thing for college players to deal with, especially for a young man who just sort of begins his career knowing, hey, if anything happens that's a little bit out of the ordinary, everybody in the world's going to know about it within 10 or 12 hours. That's got to be strange and, frankly, a little intimidating at times, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just something that you unknowingly sign up for. When you sign up to play football at a big time program, if you if you want the NIL money, you want the opportunity to play at a professional level, like this is just a consequence, something that comes along with that. Like your entire life choices are going to be put under a microscope, especially at the University of Georgia. And I really hate even using this as an example because it is a little petty mistake. I mean, I've almost done it 1,000 times going down, the wrong one way. So,
I have done it before.
I kind of relate this a little bit to the Scotty shit. Yeah, right? Who hasn't? Who almost hasn't? Who knows? And then I kind of relate this almost to the Scotty Scheffler situation a little bit. It's just it ends up becoming a distraction and taking away from the real thing at hand. Obviously, don't make the mistake again. Get it fixed and move on. But yeah, you just have to know going into it that hey, all my life choices are being examined under a microscope. And just figure out the kind of person you want to be and what you want to put onto the rest of the world.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's really well said. Before we let you go, you announced this week. You got a really fun thing coming up. It's Saturday, July 13th. You've got a free football camp taking place there at Oconee County High School. How much fun is this for you to be a part of, and what do you want kids to know about the event you got coming up here? Yeah,
Brent, thank you so much for bringing it up. It's a super, super fun event. Like Brandon said, it is July 13th. Come out, please be early so we can get you all taken care of. But we go out, we get some drills done, and then we have some fun, do some one-on-ones, and do some other really, really cool things, and get some hand-on coaching, and really just have a good time. It's summer; it's about getting better going into the fall. So come out and show up, and let's have some fun.
Yeah, the website is jakefromm24.eventbrite.com. I'll say that one more time. jakefromm24.eventbrite.com. You can check that out there. Really fun event for your young son, if he's a football player, coming up on Saturday, July 13th, a free football camp involving Jake Fromm there at Oconee County High School. So a lot of fun there on that. Jake, appreciate you giving back to the community that way. I think that's a really cool thing, and glad to have you a part of that. Also glad to get your insight on everything going on with Georgia football, so that's terrific. We'll look forward to having you back here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take again very soon as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon. Appreciate you having me.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, good stuff with Jake Fromm right there. We'll have Mike Griffith here coming up in just a moment, but love all the thoughts from Jake on everything happening with Georgia football. We're really lucky to be able to have that conversation on this program each and every week. Something else we're lucky to do is get a chance to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, one of the things I've been so excited about lately is the upcoming debut of the brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship Utopia of the Seas, but also many of you are aware that's not the only brand new ship that Royal Caribbean has introduced here in 2024. How about Icon of the Seas? People keep talking about this there as well. It's sailing out of the port of Miami. It's been sailing since January. But, man, staterooms on board Icon of the Seas, one of the hottest tickets in cruising here right now. In fact, it is the hottest ticket in cruising. And if you're watching on video, you see one of the reasons why. The Hideaway is kind of an adults-only enclave. And you got, like, the overlook there where you're kind of in the pool, and when you're in the pool there with the kind of elevated, it's almost like an infinity edge. It kind of looks over the back of the ship and out into the expanse of the ocean and all the fun stuff. If you're seeing on video, you also see Perfect Day Coco Cay off in the distance. You get kind of like the lounge beds in the pool area. You got other kinds of great places to sort of kick back and relax. It is an unbelievable way to just enjoy. I mean, you talk about perfect weather and perfect sailing conditions when you're enjoying all of that. Just one of the things that makes Icon of the Seas such an incredible introduction into the cruise space, and unlike any cruise ship that's ever sailed before. So if you want your own experience on board Icon of the Seas, now is the time to do that. Jessica Slater, the travel professional who can help you with all of that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she'll get you booked up on Icon of the Seas, Utopia of the Seas, whatever you want from Royal Caribbean here as we roll through the rest of 2024. All right, so a couple of stories here to give you. Starting off, this is not necessarily an SEC story, but I think it is interesting to SEC fans a bit, and that former Tennessee edge rusher, Tyler Barron, who had actually, spent time at Tennessee, transferred to Louisville, was injured during the spring, and now he's transferring again, which obviously is now basically allowed, and he's going to Miami. So the take here is that Barron's pretty accomplished pass rusher. He's a pretty good player. And Louisville had been pretty good at kind of attracting transfers in kind of the new era for that program with Jeff Brom as head coach. But Miami's obviously been very, very aggressive, we believe, with NIL, kind of bringing in these transfers. And, when you add a guy like Barron to what they've also done, obviously Cam Ward, the most prominent there, the quarterback coming in from Washington State. I think what you're getting to, and next week, some of you know, we've got some vacation shows coming up. And with our various guests, one of the things we're going to talk about are kind of some of those non-SEC teams that could make some playoff noise. I would say that this year, it's a little bit harder to kind of have that conversation because the Big Ten's a completely different league. The Big 12 almost feels like less than a Power 5 league now, just given the fact that Texas and Oklahoma are no longer there. The ACC, with Clemson's recent kind of drop in prestige, Florida State lost a lot off last year's regular season undefeated team, an ACC championship team. You're sort of left to wonder, okay, what is the landscape in the ACC right now? Miami may be an example of a team we haven't talked about enough. Now, some of that's because Mario Cristobal has made some pretty curious in-game coaching decisions, but still, they're doing a good job in acquiring talent. It could be that Miami is one of those teams kind of outside the SEC that we're perhaps not quite talking about enough here right now. The addition of Barron may be an example of that. I saw an interesting story where it sounds like as you kind of move into a new landscape in college athletics, athletic department's going to be asked to pay out a lot of money going forward. Some of this in the future to athletes, as much as like say $20-something million, perhaps designated to go to athlete compensation in the future. That's a line item now that college athletic departments are going to have to account for. There's also the settlement in the House versus NCAA lawsuit coming up, where back pay to ex-college athletes is going to be a part of this discussion there as well. So a lot of college programs are going to be stuck trying to figure out how we pay for all of this. Now, we had John Stinchcomb on Monday, and I thought that John was good in making sure we all know that Georgia's not really in this discussion right now, that Georgia's solvency is not in question at the moment, that they are seemingly financially well positioned to handle whatever is coming next. Other programs perhaps not quite so lucky. And one of the things that you see, Ross Dellinger's been doing some reporting on this for Yahoo, is as a way of kind of making up for the need for additional revenue, a lot of athletic departments may be turning to what you call private equity. These are like big institutional investors, where essentially ownership in college programs, Florida State comes to mind because they're the ones that probably flirted with this the most. Ownership in these college football programs could be up for grabs. Now, on the I guess first blush, this just sort of seems like easy money. Well, if these institutions are willing to give you these hundreds of millions and of dollars, why wouldn't you just take it? Well, I think the one thing we also understand is that there are no $100 bills lying on the ground. There is no easy way to sort of scoop up and just get free, easy money. It always comes with some sort of, string attached to it. And, man, I think this is the kind of thing that you got to be careful with. And I'm probably not going to get into all the reasons why I feel this way. But, man, if you give equity stake over to, like, one of these private equity groups to kind of hold on to and basically have management control over your college football program, where is the sport going at that point in time? I just think you got to be careful. I mean, ask your friends who are big professional sports fans. Like, the one thing that ruins a sports fan's experience more so than anything else is when you have bad ownership. And sometimes these sort of faceless conglomerates end up being the worst kind of ownership you can have. A lot of sports fans have dealt with their own version of that. Like, those of you who are old enough to remember when the Hawks and at the time the Thrashers, you remember when they were owned by like the Atlanta Spirit, like a whole bunch of people and like essentially a committee with each other? Do you want the college football version of that? Maybe it ends up being a nice infusion of cash for a sport that's about to really need it. Maybe that's what this ends up being. But boy, it seems like a pretty dangerous proposition overall. I'll give you one more story here too. So one of the things we've been talking about as of late are potential changes to the recruiting calendar. We know that this year the early signing period is going to move up a little earlier in December. There's also some reporting out there from Football Scoop's John Bryce right now about implementing a June signing window there as well. So, right now there's a signing period, I should say a dead period that kind of kicks in place around June 24th, so that kind of leaves July mostly dead. They would kind of move that around and sort of provide a chance for players to sign in June here, which is something that it seems like we've been moving to in some form or fashion. A lot of coaches have, expressed some concern about this, just from the standpoint that, a lot of players earn scholarships during their senior years, and there's obviously, a lot of shifting around that would have to go with that in terms of, who really does have a committable offer. We'll be finding out a lot earlier if this moves to June. This has been kicked around and talked about for some time now, and it seems like in some form or fashion we may be getting something like this in the near future. John Bryce from Football Scoop reporting on that right there, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, we'll bring in Mike Griffith here from DawgNation.com, who has no doubt been watching one of the things we've been talking about a lot on the show today. That's the lawsuit that Jaden Rashada has filed against Billy Napier and a couple of figures around the Florida program. Mike, we've said before, we don't necessarily pretend to be, legal experts on this. I have no idea if the lawsuit has merit or not. But it certainly is entertaining to watch some Florida people have to squirm about this, to think that Billy Napier might be forced to explain himself and defend himself against allegations of fraud. That's at least fun to consider, whether it's legally true or not. What do you make of all of this and the fact that, as has been reported, the Rashada lawsuit came with what was believed to be Kirby Smart's blessing?
Well, I mean, it's a sign of the times, and as far as Kirby Smart's blessing, I don't really know what other option Kirby would have. I mean, if this is a legal right that a student athlete's entitled to, then I don't think Kirby. I think Kirby Smart would be getting himself sideways if he tried to intervene in someone's legal rights. And obviously, this is a case that will get a lot of attention. Again, sign of the times, cautionary tale. But let's remember that Miami had a deal in place with Rashada that Rashada backed out of. So, there's a lot of things you kind of wonder about as far as commitments and verbal agreements and contracted agreements. I think about Marvin Harrison being sideways with Fanatics and their autograph deals. And it just feels like this is an industry that's ahead of the legislation and the network in place to support it. I don't know if everyone now is scrambling to get law degrees so they can become sports lawyers and help legislate college athletes, but it does seem that there's to be a shortage of organization where all this is concerned.
So you bring up something I think it's really important, and I am way over my skis in talking about this, but I do believe this is what's going to end up being. If this turns into something really serious, this is where I think the seriousness is going to come in. You mentioned the fact that we would presume that Rashada had an agreement in place with Miami. He ended up backing out of that to come to Florida. But the case that I think that Rashada is going to try to make here is that he was induced to break that agreement because of what Florida promised him. In other words, sure, he had financial benefits coming his way from Miami. Florida said, we'll give you even more. So he, agrees to that. Then that dematerializes, which means he also lost the opportunity at Miami, as well. And I think from Rashada's standpoint, that's where the damages come in. It's not just that you promised money that you didn't have. It's that the money that you promised me prevented me from taking other money that, in the case of Miami, we'd be led to believe was real because we know how much, they've been kind of paying out when it comes to NIL. So that's where this gets really serious, at least potentially in my mind. And as I said before, I am not Alan Dershowitz. I don't know any of this stuff, but I do think that's where some of this is going to come from is you can't go around trying to convince someone to break an agreement they have with somebody else, and that can get you in trouble. And for Billy Napier, if we find out, or if it comes out in some sort of legal proceeding, that he knew some of these untruths were being spoken to Rashada and they were just going to get him on campus and try to figure it out once he got here, that probably doesn't paint Rashada, I should say, that doesn't paint Napier in a very favorable light. Now, my guess is we don't even get to court on this because most of these things actually don't go to court. But that's where I think the energy is. Did they convince him to break his deal with Miami that would have paid him? And how much did Billy Napier know about all of this, and when did he know it?
Yeah, it goes back to Kirby Smart and Justin Fields and Jake Fromm. BA, remember when Kirby said the plan is there is no plan? That was probably the best defense that Kirby Smart could possibly have. And it was also probably the best way that he could have played the quarterback situation. But now that we're seeing this transfer portal and players' ability to move freely from one year to the next, you almost wonder what sort of contracted deals players will get into for playing time or opportunities, or what sort of quote unquote recruiting promises are being made, right? And now it's getting all the way down to the inducement level, which is why coaches wanted to avoid all this, right? They didn't want there to be NIL dealings that were attached to players committing, because it does get awful sticky in terms of what possibilities and probabilities. I think about this: if you're Ryan Puglisi right now, and Dylan, you stared down Dylan Raiola's commitment right to the very end when Raiola flips to Nebraska. And then all of a sudden, here comes Jaden Rashada out of the transfer portal. And I don't think Puglisi really cares. This is a competitive kid, and everybody knows at Georgia you're going to compete at quarterback. But now we're trickling into the NIL world and some of the promises and the inducements that are made to be able to get these guys on campus. And I think this is a case that bears watching because of the precedents that's set. I thought what you just said was really interesting, that most of these cases don't go to court. I mean, to me, this isn't what our U.S. court system should be trying to support. Feels like there's a lot more important things going on than collective issues and players and what they were promised. But lo and behold, this was filed in the Pensacola courts. And so now we're all going to sit back and watch and see how this plays out. Meanwhile, the NCAA, they're being asked by Florida State, and I don't know if you saw this, but a couple years ago, Florida State tried to hijack Amarius Mims away from Georgia by illegal inducements and improper contact, and they were dealt some penalties, and now they're trying to ask the NCAA, hey, don't penalize us. There's been a lot worse stuff that's happened since then. I mean, it really is turned into a circus and Keystone Cops.
Yeah, I'll say one more thing about this. I mean, for a long time, as long as I can remember, there's always been sort of this Wild West nature of recruiting, where like players are saying all kinds of stuff, programs are saying all kinds of stuff, and there's a certain level of puffery and exaggeration that's always going to be tolerated. In other words, if you're a player and I'm a coach, Mike, I may say to you, man, they ain't a player in the country better than you. We think you can start as a freshman. That's probably not true, but it's also not like falsifiable either. It's just sort of the kind of the accepted puffery of everybody's making exaggerated claims, and that's the sort of exaggerated claim that coaches have been making forever. However, when it comes to like NIL payments, that's a specific claim written down on paper. And that's what we're kind of moving into, where, as this stuff is now, I guess you want to say like above the table or something like that, all of a sudden now the NIL claim isn't just sort of accepted exaggeration and puffery, even though, some coaches, I believe, have tried to treat it that way. All of a sudden now we're making like actual specific claims with actual attached value to some of this kind of stuff. And when you're not getting what you think you're supposed to get, whether it be, program looking at a player or player looking back at a program, one way or another, this is probably not the only one of these type of situations that we see until this market, kind of stabilizes a little bit more and perhaps becomes a little bit more efficient.
I know this is blowing your mind, because I still remember 2 years ago when Bro Bible came out with what seemed like an unbelievable story that neither you or I could wrap our brain around, until Nick Saban just happened to say it on camera, and the whole Jimbo Fisher, Lane Kiffin, Nick Saban thing blew up. And what's fascinating about that, in hindsight, looking back at that number one ranked Texas A&M class, and I don't know if there was anything written or not, Brandon, but think about this. Lane Kiffin was one of the guys that was making the biggest deal out of it. And Ole Miss has 22 transfers. They've been more active with this buying players from other schools than anybody. And Nick Saban, who fanned the flames to get Alabama involved in getting transfers, Two of them from Georgia, by the way, that factored into the SEC. He's retired because he says it's changed the game. And where's Jimbo Fisher these days? And what island did he buy with this $72 million buyout? I mean, there's bodies strewn everywhere. It's like the airplane scene, nothing to see here. And it just keeps getting worse, not better. Even as it's above board, even as the cooler minds and the legislators and the academic leaders and the so-called professionals are supposed to be trying to get a handle on this, it keeps getting worse, not better. I almost hearken to the days when it was underground and we didn't even know about this. To me, like, those were the good old days. We didn't want to know about these deals. Now we're dealing with court cases and messy situations and he said and NIL deals and what's happened to I'm the old man shaking my fist at the clouds, I guess, this morning.
All right, so let me finish with this on a completely different topic. We heard from Wes Johnson earlier. Georgia's lost to LSU. Give me just a quick thumbnail here. So Georgia loses to LSU. Kind of wait now a couple of days to find out its NCAA tournament fate. We know they're going to be hosting a regional. Do they still host a super regional? That seems a little bit shaky, but we'll see. Softball team, speaking of the super regional, they're traveling way out to UCLA. Give me a little bit of a thumbnail here on these two spring sports and kind of what's next for both of them after a early exit for Georgia and the Georgia softball team sort of staying alive, beating Liberty and now moving on to take on UCLA.
Yeah, let's start with that softball team, Brandon. Earlier this year, that softball team won 16 out of their first 17 games, and that included a win over UCLA at a tournament in Florida. They've beaten a lot of ranked teams. It's a very savvy team with a lot of experience. It's a World Series potential team, but they faded late. And sometimes that happens with veteran teams. They were up against it against Liberty. Like you said, they lost Saturday, had to come back and win twice on Sunday and won it on a Sidney Chambly walk-off hit. You see the celebration right there. So this is a very game team. Nothing would surprise me. It's a veteran team. I believe there's 9 or 10 of these young women that have their degrees in hand. They're very capable of beating UCLA on the West Coast. UCLA, a traditional powerhouse, but much like many of the other Pac-12 sports, they faltered a little bit. So we'll watch and see. Wouldn't be surprised by any result there for Georgia softball if they got to the Women's College World Series or if they were limited. Certainly a capable team. Now, baseball, Wes is limited in his pitching, and we knew that. And Georgia's really not set up to make a deep run in a tournament like the SEC tournament, where you're playing Tuesday and Wednesday, and then it goes double elimination. Georgia just doesn't have the arms for this tournament. And Wes was not going to disrupt his rotation and throw anybody's arm out trying to win this tournament. Now, are they a super team? Are they a top 8 seed? I know this. They had the number 5 RPI in the nation, and they have the best offense in the country. I don't know how much credence or how much weight the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee will put on the SEC baseball tournament. When the season ended, Georgia was projected by some of the publications to be a top 8 team. We'll have to wait and see. It's very relevant if they're a top 8 seed. 70% of the teams that host a super regional go on to the World Series. We know that Georgia baseball has not advanced beyond the regionals since that 2008 World Series team. So we've seen a fascinating season, but as of now, the Dogs have lost their last 3 to a very game and desperate Florida team at home. And then this last loss to LSU, another team trying to play their way in. We'll find out on Monday. There'll be a selection show. We'll find out who's coming to Athens for that 4-team regional. And if the Dogs can advance to a super, we'll learn if they're a top 8 seed, if they'll be hosting a super regional, or if they'll have to travel the following week to try to get to Omaha in the College Baseball World Series.
All right, Mike, great stuff. We'll look forward to reading plenty more from you at DawgNation.com. Thanks for your time. Also, yesterday recording some stuff that we'll hear on next week's edition of DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. So we certainly appreciate that there as well. And we'll have you back here, of course, in a live format again very soon, too.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith. And speaking of good stuff, y'all know from me, good stuff at the conclusion of every one of my shows is a Dr. Pepper. That's sort of my daytime treat, kind of everybody needs that little pick-me-up in the afternoon. And that's what Dr. Pepper is for me. And many of you also excited about what Dr. Pepper's got in store for you this summer there as well. The debut of a brand new flavor. It's Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. This is a really fun thing for summer. If you like, kind of being like at the beach or kind of like that Caribbean coastal vibe, the coconut flavor, of course, a wonderful example of that. And it's one of the cool things that Dr. Pepper likes to do. Of course, Dr. Pepper's been a favorite for decades and decades and decades. And now taking a twist on the original flavor with some of these cool flavor additions, Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. Make sure you try all of that today as you're shopping at your local Kroger, wherever you're picking up your groceries. Pick yourself up some Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. So as we wrap up here today for our Golden Shoe, it's kind of a throwback to something we were talking about on our First and 15, which is a video chat show that we do. It's a pre-show to the show on DawgNation.com. Scott Harris mentioning that former Georgia coach Mark Richt has gotten his Hall of Fame, College Football Hall of Fame blazer. And on the inside, it's got a really cool lining that Coach Richt had shared on social media, and Scott Harris shared this with me. And if you're not watching on video, I'll describe it for you. So it's the logo of all the college programs that Coach Richt has been involved with during his coaching career. Obviously, head coach at Georgia, former offensive coordinator at Florida State. You see the Seminole logo there, and the Miami U, both in terms of where Coach Richt originally played, but also a head coach when his time at Georgia came to an end. So a wonderful way to kind of commemorate the great career of Coach Richt, and kind of a cool lining to have inside the classic Hall of Fame blazer. I appreciate Scott sharing that with us. We'll give him a golden shoe, and also Coach Richt a golden shoe for the great career that he's put together there at the University of Georgia, too. Lousy, stinking Gators. We'll also make fun of them right now. Lawsuits and mess involving Billy Napier. Their biggest problem is they can't buy wins in the football field, including against Georgia. Been a long time, 1,292 days since they've beaten the Dogs, and we don't see that changing anytime soon. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. All right, we're going to run through the comments here. Starting on Facebook, Nicole House gives you go Dogs. Nicole, it's great to see you. Bill Sanders on the subject of the NCAA, he and Gerald Harmon talking. Bill says, after the NCAA lost at the Supreme Court, they basically just threw up their hands and walked away instead of working out at least a framework for something. I kind of agree with Bill on this, and here's my frustration. Like the people who run college athletics, NCAA executives, and in some cases like athletic department administrators, they're obviously all very well paid. And I honestly don't think they understand what the money is for. Like, why do you make the money you make, especially for those who are kind of in NCAA leadership? The reason why you make the money is because you're supposed to be the caretaker of the institution. And I don't believe the NCAA has done a very good job as of late of being the caretaker for the institution. Of course, the thing everybody always points out, and this is accurate, is the NCAA is just sort of a front for the member institutions themselves. The NCAA is just sort of a layer of bureaucracy to do the bidding that the various schools want. But that doesn't change what I'm saying from being true, because the various athletic departments, I think, from time to time sort of function the same way. If you want to go back more than 20 years ago, you have a situation where the NCAA seemingly didn't think their authority could be questioned, and so therefore sometimes they behaved pretty harshly. Think about all like the weird transfer things where even in cases of like legitimate hardship, they just were unwavering and they didn't want to bend rules at all for the fear of what it would perhaps cause for the future. And that sort of rigid control over college athletics kind of cost them their mandate. People decided they didn't like the NCAA very much. And so when their authority couldn't be questioned, they didn't see any need to defend themselves because they were all powerful. Well, now they're in a situation where public tide, for the most part, has kind of shifted against the NCAA, especially among big city folks with postgraduate degrees. That's sort of what we kind of think of as, I hate to say this phrase because it's, politically charged, but like the elites, people who live in big cities and have a lot of fancy degrees, they don't like the NCAA anymore. And that's the group of people that sort of drives public opinion in America. And now the NCAA has gone from a situation more than 20 years ago where they would say, we don't have to defend ourselves because we're all powerful. Now they're scared to defend themselves because public sentiment has shifted against them. And that kind of cowardice is what's going to ultimately potentially bring an end to college athletics. The fact that they're not capable or not willing to offer a forceful defense of the college model. And listen, even in the midst of a time in which most people are kind of okay with some form of compensation for college athletes, there is still a defense to be offered of the college system as we've understood it. But the feckless cowards who run the NCAA are just not willing to make it because they're scared of what people are going to say back to them. They just don't have the courage of their conviction, because the only real conviction they have is how do we make sure we hold on to some power? And that, I would say, is a huge problem here, is that we have a system that's ultimately eroding because no one has the guts to defend it. There is a defense to be offered. It just takes a little bit of courage and backbone to do it. And that's something that when it comes to like NCAA leadership and in some cases college administration leadership, that's a level of courage that's just in short supply. All right, let's find out what else is going on here. Jacob O'Neill says Bill Sanders' comment took up all of our time. Listen, I'm starting on Facebook. We're having a good time here. Let's see what else is on Facebook. I'm trying to scroll up here and find something good to read. A lot of the comments are people commenting about other commenters, which I love, the back and forth, but I'm always trying to find something that I can kind of respond to. Gary Holt says that college football will eventually end up being NFL's little brother. No other way to go that I could see. And look, if it does come to that, one of the reasons why, I get kind of, bothered about this is if that does happen, it's not going to be as popular. It's just not going to. And the reason why we know that is because no minor league sport is popular. Minor league baseball is essentially disappearing. The G League, is a total non-factor in terms of the sports world. Think about the Korn Ferry Tour in golf. It's not only is it not on TV, it doesn't even stream anywhere. It exists. It's a platform to make your way to the PGA Tour, but it has no media presence whatsoever. There are all kinds of spring professional leagues that start up. A lot of them can't even make it through the season without going out of business. That professional sports at a level below the major professional level, there's just no appetite for it in America whatsoever. And I've said this before, and look, I realize this is not going to be popular with everybody, but I think one of the interesting test cases on some of this is going to be Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark is an obvious phenomenon. But let's watch her popularity when she was wearing a college uniform compared to the popularity that she has when she's wearing a professional uniform. If I had to suggest, and based on some early ticket prices, it seems like I might end up being right about this. If I had to suggest, Caitlin's going to end up being less popular as a pro than she was as a collegiate athlete. And ultimately, that, to me, comes down to the fact that even though Caitlin Clark in her own right is a undeniable phenomenon, there is still something about an athlete like that existing within college sports that just means more to people than the same kind of thing in the professional realm. Now, it's not easy to explain, but I believe it's undeniably true. And I do think there's a moment in which that when you kind of put what has been college football and make it, young professionals, it's not going to change overnight, but I do believe it'll change eventually to just not be as popular. Because there is an aspect of this that's a little bit not quite authentic, but people like the part that's not authentic. I'll make a comparison. My family, we like to go to theme parks. Just, not everybody likes to do that, but my family, we go to a lot of theme parks. And I'm like the Griswold, basically, right? So we're always doing stuff like that. And Michael Eisner, he was CEO of Disney when Hollywood Studios opened. It was called something different at the time, but it was sort of a celebration of old Hollywood. And the phrase that Eisner used was, it's a celebration of Hollywood as it never was and always will be. And I think there's an element of that that's also true for college football. This has never been about, at least solely about amateurs who are going to school during the week and playing football on the weekend. There's an element of that that's sort of never been true. But the idea that college football represents the development of young people in college athletics beyond just football, represents the development of young people, people like that story, whether it's completely true or not. That's one of the reasons why college athletics is so much more popular than other, non-high-level professional sports entities. People like the story, whether it's true or not. And if you start trying to tell a different story, there is a chance that people just don't like that quite as much. Because young talent in and of itself is just not that interesting to people. If it was, there'd be more competitors to college football already. Let us see what else is going on the Facebook side of things. Gerald Harmon says it's the NCAA's fault for not regulating some rules around NIL. Yeah, I think if they could go back and do that differently, they might try to, I think. But I think the problem is a little bit like almost like the SEC scheduling model stuff. They would agree to it if there was agreement. They would have something in place if there was agreement. But college athletics is such a large entity overall. There are 133, I think, Division I programs. They are not all the same. And so when you have so many different, institutions within like the larger body, they just see the world differently. They have different priorities. And so therefore it's not always easy to get them to agree on things. Johnny Prescott says he graduated from Oconee County. He wonders if Jake Fromm would let him come to the football camp. That would be kind of interesting. I feel like we ought to have more, people see like you see the advertisements sometimes like the Braves fantasy camp and things like that. I've never done that. I feel like we need to have more sports for adults. I know there's some adult leagues and things like that, but I feel like that needs to be more of a thing. I don't know how well I would hold up in anything like that these days, but I think that'd be kind of a nice thing to do. On YouTube here for a moment. Let's see what else. Let me see what Natalie's saying. Natalie says, Natalie says, so she's watching the show. This is very funny from Natalie. She says she's watching the show, and we're talking about the Jaden Rashada lawsuit. And she says her neighbor, who's a lousy, stinking Gator grad, as she calls him, heard it and said, turn that off. So Natalie's telling us a really good story there of just how bothered Florida fans are by all of this right now. Natalie, I think that's really funny, and I appreciate you telling us that story. I think that's pretty good right there, Natalie. Pretty funny. I'm going to save that, too. I like that. That's pretty funny. Johnny Surf Dog says, I think that Florida should lose 50 scholarships for 10 years. I think that's fair. Yeah, that seems about right. 50 scholarships over the course of a 10-year period. That seems about right. I'd take that. I'd take that. Senio G says he would dominate an adult league in any sport. Listen, Senio, you got more self-confidence right now than I probably do. It's been at least 10 years since I've played 5-on-5 pickup basketball. It's been at least 10 years. Man, even 10 years ago, that took a lot out of me. Actually, it's not. Yeah, about 10 years probably. I started to say it's been less than that, but it's been a little less than 10 years. It's been less than 10 years. But still, man, that took a lot out of me. I wonder if I could do it right now. I'd be scared to know. Because even regular exercise, like just like regular run-of-the-mill exercise, it's like I can sort of feel my Achilles, got a little thing in my knee. It's just like that's the thing. And listen, I think that getting older gets a bad rap. I think in some respects life gets better as you get a little older, because I do think in some cases, not all cases, and certainly not all the time, but in some cases, I do make better decisions now than I used to make. And I think that your decisions is the ultimate impact on your quality of life. And so as you get older and hopefully make better decisions, life kind of gets better because of that. So I think in some cases, getting older gets a little bit of a bad rap, that actually life gets better as you progress. They don't tell you that, but in some respects it is true. But the one area in which that's not true, for those of us who like sports, is, man, sports get harder. Sports get harder. And, yeah, I see this with my son. Like, I love playing baseball with my son. I always have. It's amazing, and he's 12 now, so he's kind of getting to that age. It's amazing how quickly he's gotten to the point where he clearly throws it harder than I do now, throws it farther than I do. And so one of the things we'll do sometimes, just as kind of a way of kind of staying loose, we'll do a little long toss. And it used to be that, like, whatever long toss he could do, I could do. Well, now he can long toss. He can easily long toss a lot farther than I can. And so in a lot of respects, I think that getting older is actually kind of nice. But in the aspect of what it means for you athletically, probably not quite as good. Not quite as good. Jay Shipe says my only form of exercise is setting up a velvet rope to get paid for autographs. Jay, you know that's not true. I will say this, though. You know, sometimes I like the comfort that the desk provides, because I think the desk hides a lot. You know, we turn and do the interviews, and I kind of point to this camera over here. It's not quite as concealing anymore. And, man, I've gained a lot of weight. I have not been exercising much lately. You know, just one of those things. Like, you know, this is the time of year when I tend to get a little bit more relaxed. It's just amazing how quick you gain weight. I've gained so much weight. And, like, I'm probably not the kind of person that you want, like, the full body shot of necessarily anyway. But when I turn to the side, don't have the desk to conceal me anymore, you realize, gosh, I am a fat slob right now. Fat slob. But we'll get that fixed before the season starts. Let's see what else is going on here. DMart 42 on the subject of Ernest Green against Mikael Williams at practice. That should be fun to see. I had a thing I want to do on Mikael Williams at some point in time. Eventually, I guess we'll probably get there. Let's see what else. DMart 42 says he thinks that Rashada perhaps has a case based on the Miami contract, but he doubts he gets $13 million. Yeah, and this is one of the things I think for a long time, and I'm not trying to be like the ombudsman here, but I don't think the sports media does a very good job of covering lawsuits. And, you know, I'm no legal expert, but I do know this, is that lawsuits are always written in the most salacious manner possible. And that's the attorney trying to make the claim seem really bad. Like, you're trying to make the most intense allegations possible. But a lot of times sports media types run with, like, lawsuit allegations as if they are evidence. And that's, you know, clearly inappropriate. That's just an inappropriate context to put the lawsuit in. And I'm not going to give you examples of this, but there are, you know, many such cases where, you know, a lawsuit has been brought about. Media sort of runs with the claims in the lawsuit because this is coming from a lawyer. And, you know, sports media types always love lawyers as sources because they have kind of the whiff of credibility. They're easy to get on the phone. They say interesting things. And so there's no better source for the average, you know, sort of sports media type than a lawyer. But when it comes to, like the actual claims sometimes, though, you know, they have a legal obligation to sort of paint their client in the most favorable light possible, which means some pretty outlandish claims sometimes. So, you know, the idea that whatever Rashada gets will be south of $14 million, my guess is that's probably true. Jonathan Aaron says, what about a takeover in St. Simons before the Georgia-Florida game? We've done that before. It's really fun. We have had some great times doing that over the years. Maybe at some point in time we will do that again. Let us see what else. DT says, my daughter was all DeKalb County softball first team. You know, I would get in the cage to show her what's up. Old dad can still tear the cover off the ball. Well, listen, that's nice to know. And every now and then I'll have a decent moment, but for the most part, my athletic prowess, which was never very impressive, has kind of gone away. Let's see what else. PDT says Jake Fromm could get some big names for upcoming DawgNation 5K. Sounds like a good idea to me. Let's see what else. They're giving me a little bit of a hard time on DawgNation.com for not spending enough time over there. The truth is, you know, if anything, just to be totally honest with you, my bosses say I spend too much time on comments as it is. So we're trying to keep this we're trying to keep this portion of the show as long as we possibly can. Shane Holiday says that for Georgia, the dagger for hosting a super regional was the series loss to the lousy stinging Gators. That cracked the door for the other programs like Oregon State, and NC State, and Florida State. Possibly so. I also think there's just an element of, and maybe this is fair, maybe this is not, Shane knows this team pretty well, that to me, Georgia was always sort of a regional level team and not quite at the super regional level. And I just think that things are probably kind of shaking out the way they were probably supposed to. And I don't think that means you can't get to a World Series from a regional. I think you possibly could. But in kind of year one of Wes Johnson, if Georgia ends up being the 9, the 10, the 11, seed, something along those lines, that feels like a pretty significant accomplishment and probably about right there as well. All right, let's do one more trip around the comment section. We're going to be done for today. Back on YouTube here for a moment. G. Gray says, I miss playing summer baseball at the park. The teams were something. Yeah, I just love that kind of thing. I do. I love watching my kids play like that. Just fun, right? It's like, I don't know. It's just like anything that you're kind of outside doing like that, especially if it's sort of like pickup and not always super organized, just good stuff. It's just good. I just love that. I love that. George on Tap says bad self-talk ain't it, BA. Well, I don't know that it's bad self-talk necessarily. Listen, I have my occasional moments, but I was never that great of an athlete to begin with. So that's also I was actually thinking about this the other day. It's like, if you were like a high-level athlete, when it goes, that's going to be kind of depressing. But if you were kind of a mid to lowish level athlete, 40-something, you're not necessarily that much worse than you used to be because you weren't that great to begin with. It's actually one of the good things about not necessarily being, an A-level athlete is when you get a little older, it's like, it's not that different than it used to be because it wasn't probably that great to begin with. But the stories you tell of you in your own mind, though, those are the ones that they're always impressive. Paul Moon says organize a YouTube versus a Facebook flag football game. That's not too bad. By the way, Georgia on Tap also pointing out what we talked about earlier, the fact that the people, like, who knew this? People down in Gainesville call him Napier, like Navy Pier without the V as a part of it. They call him Napier, not Napier. Like, I had no idea. I'm not changing the way I call him, but that's what they say. Nature Gator. Do you call him Napier? Because I feel like I heard a lot of people from Gainesville yesterday calling him Napier. That was new to me. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. We're going to wrap it up for today. Let's see what else is going on here. Tino Calvino, Marshall Fleming talking about kids playing sports. Philip Jordan Wells says, yoga, walking, strength training, what you need to keep the I'm not reading that, Philip. I thought you were trying to give me a real comment. All of a sudden, you take it into a different direction. Miriam Corbin says, I hope that Jake gets another assignment, but if he doesn't, please ask him and his wife, new son, to come on for one of our invasions. Both, yeah, that'd be great. I'm obviously hopeful for Jake on that front, too. I think he certainly deserves it. He played really well in the preseason a year ago, which is, I think, for some of us who are rooting for him, a little frustrating, the fact that, it seems like all you can do is try to play well when you get your opportunity, and it seems like Fromm did. I don't know. Sometimes different teams are looking for different things, I guess. That's the case. All right, good stuff, y'all. Have a great day. We will talk to you soon here. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. Philip Jordan Wells said it was still great advice. Yeah, maybe it is, Philip. Anyway, y'all find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that, including getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. That's what they're all about. They take good care of you. Longtime friends of ours. And story after story, they've been putting smiles on the faces of folks in our audience for many, many years. And they'll do the same thing for you when you find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.